The first thing Daniel Harper noticed was the little girl's shoes. They were soaked through. Rainwater dripped from the frayed pink sneakers onto the polished floor of the 24-hour diner, leaving tiny puddles beneath her feet while she clung silently to her mother's hand. The child couldn't have been older than 6. Exhaustion sagged in her small shoulders, but she still tried to smile at the tired waitress who handed them a menu they clearly couldn't afford. Daniel looked away at first, not because he didn't care, because he understood too well what desperation looked like. 3 years earlier, after his wife died from an aggressive illness, he had spent months learning how to survive grief while raising his son alone. Some nights he and 8-year-old Caleb had eaten boxed macaroni by candlelight because the electricity bill had gone unpaid. Some mornings Daniel sat in his truck before work, staring at overdue notices and wondering how much longer he could keep pretending everything was okay. So when he saw the woman discreetly counting crumpled dollar bills beneath the table, his chest tightened. The diner buzzed softly around them. Forks clinked against plates. Coffee steamed in chipped mugs. Outside, the storm hammered the streets of Ohio hard, enough to flood intersections and strand travelers overnight. Daniel's son sat across from him in their booth, coloring superheroes onto a paper placemat. "Dad," Caleb whispered, glancing toward the woman and child. "I think they're hungry." Daniel swallowed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think so too." The woman looked young, maybe early 30s. Her blonde hair stuck damply to her cheeks, and she wore the expression of someone trying very hard not to fall apart in public. The waitress approached their table again. "You folks ready to order?" The woman hesitated. "Can I just get 1 grilled cheese?" she asked softly. "And an extra plate?" The waitress paused for half a second before nodding kindly. "Of course, honey." Caleb stopped coloring. "1 sandwich for both of them?" he asked after the waitress left. Daniel nodded slowly. The boy frowned in the thoughtful way children do when they encounter unfairness for the first time. Without saying another word, Caleb slid out of the booth and walked toward the counter. Daniel watched him curiously. A moment later, Caleb returned carrying the slice of chocolate pie Daniel had bought him for dessert. "Can you give this to them?" he asked. Daniel blinked. "Buddy, that's your favorite." "I know," Caleb shrugged. "But I think they need it more." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. For a second, he saw his late wife in their son, the same softness, the same instinct to give even when they had little themselves. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly emotional. "Yeah," he said thickly. "We can do that." He asked the waitress to deliver the pie, anonymously along with 2 hot meals instead of 1 sandwich. The woman looked confused when the plates arrived. "I think there's been a mistake," she said quickly. The waitress smiled. "No mistake. Someone wanted to help." The woman's eyes immediately filled with tears. She glanced around the diner, trying to figure out who had done it, but Daniel kept his focus on his coffee. Caleb grinned proudly. For a little while, that seemed like the end of it. Then the storm got worse. By midnight, emergency alerts buzzed across phones throughout the diner. Roads were flooding. Highways had closed. Power lines were down across several counties. The waitress turned the television volume higher. "Residents are being advised not to travel unless absolutely necessary." People groaned and checked weather apps anxiously. Daniel stood and pulled on his jacket. "We should head home before it gets worse." But when he stepped outside, freezing rain slapped him across the face. Wind howled through the parking lot. Water surged over the curb near his truck tires. Even worse, his engine wouldn't start. He tried twice more before muttering under his breath, "Great!" Caleb hugged himself against the cold. "We stuck?" "Maybe for a while." The diner owner eventually announced that anyone stranded could stay until morning, but around 2 a.m. the power flickered out completely. A collective sigh filled the darkened restaurant. Emergency backup lights cast dim shadows across exhausted faces. The young woman sat curled protectively around her daughter in a corner booth. The child had fallen asleep against her chest. Daniel noticed the woman quietly shivering. Without overthinking it, he walked over. "I've got blankets in my truck," he said. "You can use them." She looked embarrassed. "Oh no, I couldn't." "You could," he interrupted gently. "It's freezing in here." A few minutes later, wrapped in old camping blankets, The little girl finally looked warm enough to sleep peacefully. The woman exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "I'm Daniel." "Rachel?" Caleb waved sleepily from their booth. "That's my son." Rachel smiled faintly. "My daughter's Lily." For the next hour, stranded strangers shared phone chargers, snacks, and stories beneath flickering emergency lights. Something about disasters always stripped life down to what mattered most. People stopped pretending. A truck driver shared beef jerky with college students. An elderly woman handed out peppermint candies from her purse. The waitress brewed coffee on a portable gas burner. And slowly, the diner stopped feeling like a room full of strangers. Rachel eventually admitted she and Lily had been driving to Cleveland after leaving an abusive relationship in Kentucky. "I didn't really have a plan," she confessed quietly. "Just knew I needed to leave." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Do you have family there?" She shook her head. "Just a friend from high school who said we could stay for a few days." There was shame in her voice that she clearly couldn't hide. Daniel recognized that too. The shame of needing help, the shame of not knowing what comes next. Around 3 in the morning, Caleb stretched out across the booth and yawned dramatically. "There's not enough room," he mumbled. Daniel smiled tiredly. "Make room, buddy." But before Caleb could settle again, little Lily stirred awake, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Rachel kissed her forehead gently. "Try to sleep, sweetheart." Lily looked around the crowded diner. Then her gaze landed on Daniel and Caleb, squeezed together in their booth beneath one blanket. In the innocent, heartbreakingly honest voice only children possess, she asked softly, "Is there space in your bed, too?" The diner fell strangely quiet around them. Rachel's face immediately crumpled in humiliation. "Oh my God, Lily!" But Daniel understood instantly what the child meant. Not a real bed? Not really. She was asking if there was space for them somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere kind. The little girl was too young to explain fear properly, but old enough to recognize safety when she saw it. Daniel looked at Caleb. His son didn't hesitate. "Yeah," Caleb said, scooting over. "There's room." Rachel burst into tears. Not loud dramatic sobs, just the silent kind that come when someone has been strong for far too long. Daniel sat down slowly across from her. "You don't have to figure everything out tonight," he said gently. She covered her mouth, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry. We've had some bad nights lately." Daniel nodded. "I know." And he did know. Not her exact pain, but loneliness, fear, the crushing exhaustion of carrying responsibility alone. By morning, the storm had finally passed. Sunlight filtered weakly through the diner windows, revealing sleeping strangers, sprawled across booths and chairs like survivors of some strange emotional shipwreck. Daniel managed to get his truck running after another customer helped him. Jump-started. Rachel prepared to leave with Lily, though it was obvious she had nowhere secure to go. Daniel wrestled internally for several long seconds. Then he heard his late wife's voice in his memory. "Kindness costs something. Otherwise it isn't kindness." He took a breath. "I have a guest room," he said carefully. "You and Lily can stay a few days until you figure things out." Rachel stared at him in shock. "I can't impose like that." "You're not." Tears filled her eyes again. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Daniel looked at Caleb, who was teaching Lily how to draw Batman symbols on napkins. Then he answered honestly, "Because once someone did it for me." Years earlier, after his wife's funeral, Daniel had broken down in a grocery store parking lot because his bank card kept declining. A stranger behind him had quietly paid for his groceries without asking questions. That small act had carried him through one of the darkest days of his life. He never forgot it. And now, standing in that storm-worn diner, he realized kindness had a way of traveling forward through people, one act becoming another, one moment of grace surviving long enough to save someone else. Rachel and Lily stayed with Daniel and Caleb for 2 weeks. Then 2 months. Rachel found work at a dental office nearby. Lily started school. Slowly, the fear faded from their faces. The house that had once felt unbearably empty after Daniel's loss began to feel alive again. Laughter returned first. Then hope. And one evening, months later, Daniel walked past the living room to find Caleb and Lily asleep side by side during movie night while Rachel folded laundry on the couch. She looked up and smiled softly. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like life was something he merely survived. It felt like home again, all because one little girl, exhausted and afraid, had asked the simplest question in the world. Is there space?